Hi, I'm Charles Jacobs from the Jewish Leadership Project. Recently, something changed in Newton, Massachusetts. It was the Jews. They changed. Jews in Newton had had enough. Enough anti-Israel curriculum in their public schools, enough anti-Israel teachers' unions, enough anti-Israel school boards, enough cars with Palestinian flags chasing Jewish kids in the center of town, enough defacing Israeli hostage posters on the private property of Jewish homes. The Jews in Newton decided this has to stop. For decades, there have been anti-Israel events in and around Boston, speeches in high schools and on campuses, book talks, workshops in community centers, all defaming the Jewish state for decades. For decades, Boston's Jewish leaders, the Federation, the ADL, the AJC, the Jewish Community Relations Council, and even most rabbis, mostly ignored this constant stream of anti-Zionism, which, as we now see, was the kindling of this current explosion of Jew hatred. But on May 9th, 2024, for the first time, the Jews fought back face to face. The Newton Public Library had been hosting an exhibit entitled, quote, "The Ongoing and Relentless Nakba, the Palestinian Catastrophe of 1948, unquote. The library called it an art exhibit. It consisted of a dozen or so photographs of pitiable Palestinians, alongside a framed description claiming that the Jews, in order to create Israel, ethnically cleansed 750,000 Palestinian Arabs from the land and kicked them out of their homes. Anti-Zionists call this the Nakba. The library nodded its assent. But it's nonsense, because what actually happened in 1948 was that 6 Arab armies invaded the new Jewish state with the explicit intent of committing genocide, to kill every Jew, quote, from the river to the sea. Arab leaders told Palestinians to leave the area during the Arab invasion and come back when all the Jews were dead or had fled. This is documented history, easily found in almost any library, even in Newton's. So for the Newton Library to promote the idea that this failed slaughter is something to be sad about, and to promote the idea that the Jews were guilty of ethnic cleansing, was not just disgraceful, but, given what's been happening in Newton, also dangerous. Rabbis from Newton asked the mayor, Ruthanne Fuller, to scrap the program, given the surge of Jew hatred in her town. In a citywide newsletter, the mayor agreed that the exhibit was not a good thing, that it was divisive, but, she explained, it was protected as free speech. Every Jewish person in Newton instinctively understood that the mayor would never, ever use the principle of free speech to allow a diatribe against any other group, blacks, feminists, gays, or Muslims, in Newton's library. Free speech, it seems, is the freest when it attacks Jews. When they learned that the library was going to host a talk by the artist in a special reception for his exhibit, people again tried to intervene. They asked the mayor to turn this one-sided propaganda event into a community discussion. They suggested a debate, or at least to allow the Jewish side to speak immediately after the artist. The mayor ignored all these suggestions. So, upset at being betrayed by the city, and concerned that this public libel against Jews, which was made kosher by the mayor, might lead to more attacks, over 100 Jews came to the library on May 9th to make their voices heard. There they found dozens of anti-Israel activists waiting outside for the event to begin. Both sides tried to fill up the room where the talk was to be held. Some friends of the artists were told they could cut the line. But by the time the program started, there were about equal numbers seated. There were also about a dozen Newton policemen to keep things peaceful. The MC of the evening, Jill Charney, turned out to be a Jewish Voice for Peace organizer. JVP is a virulently anti-Israel group funded by billionaire anti-Zionist George Soros to put a Jewish face on anti-Semitism. Charney began by telling the audience that they must remain
100% quiet
during the presentation, that people could only submit written questions after the talk, and that after the talk of the main presenter, there were going to be 3 more Palestinian speakers who would talk about how the art affected them. The Jews who had come to make their voices heard were stunned. Some yelled out, "Shame! Shame!" When the speaker began his talks, the Jews in the crowd spoke over him. "It's not fair. Let us debate this," were the cries. The noise was very loud, so the speaker left his podium and went into the middle of the room so that his supporters at the back might be able to hear him. This sparked a verbal battle between the two sides. It went on and on. The climax came when the Jews spontaneously began singing Hatikva. The anti-Zionists screamed, "Free, free, free Palestine!" And "From the sea to the river, Palestine will live forever." Even they screamed, The din drowned out the speaker. He finally gave up. The event ended. And so on that night, Newton's Jews were not defamed in their own public library. Later outside, the two camps reconvened. Newton's Jews discovered that they had been joined by Jews from Marblehead and Sharon, and a truck full of Jews and Christians came up from Rhode Island. Across the street from one another, separated by cordons of police, the two groups chanted at each other for over an hour. The Jews waved American and Israeli flags, sang the Star-Spangled Banner and Am Yisrael Chai. Their adversaries raised the Palestinian flag, screamed, wore masks to guard their identities, and also keffiyehs, which some on our side had learned to call rape scarves. After a while, finally, everybody went home. And so we can now all wonder, if Jews had acted this way all these years, all the years that one-sided propaganda events were preparing the ground for this massive surge of anti-Semitism, if the Jews had been organized and supported by their leaders to demand equal time, to demand no defamatory attacks funded by taxpayer money, to demand respect, and to pay careful attention to our adversaries' long-term strategy of turning our neighbors against us, we wonder if things would be different today. And so we also wonder if Jews in America should take this example of courage as a model for Jewish activism in response to the surge of anti-Semitism in America. Stay tuned. This is Charles Jacobs, Jewish Leadership Project.